the Israeli military has launched a new airstrike that reignites tensions in southern Lebanon. On Wednesday, September 3, 2025, the village of Ansari became the target of a deadly operation. One civilian, a national of Soya, was killed, while several others were left injured in the aftermath of the strike. According to local media, the airstrike targeted a bulldozer maintenance complex. Visual footage from the site shows collapsed buildings, raging flames, and thick black smoke billowing into the sky. Panic has gripped the local population, with many residents fleeing their homes in fear of further attacks. Emergency workers were seen rushing to assist the wounded amid the devastation. Israel, however, denies that civilians were deliberately targeted. IDF spokesperson for Arab media, Avis Andre, stated that the operation was directed at Hezbollah facilities and a technical equipment depot. In a post on the platform X, Andre claimed that the location was being used by Hezbollah to prepare attacks against Israeli territory, framing the strike as a defensive measure. The incident also raised alarms within the United Nations. Peacekeeping forces under UNIFIL reported that Israeli drones dropped 4 grenades dangerously close to their personnel in southern Lebanon. UNIFIL labeled the attack the most serious violation since the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah in November last year. UN officials stressed that Israel had been informed in advance about ongoing road clearance work in Marwahin but failed to ensure the safety of UN troops. Meanwhile, France and Qatar issued strong condemnations of Israel's actions. Both nations described the incident as a clear violation of international law and UN Security Council resolutions. With tensions escalating at the Lebanon-Israel border, the international community is now closely watching to see if the situation could spiral into a wider conflict. Following the Ansari strike, the Israeli military released footage showing operations near the Lebanon border. In its statement, the IDF said its forces dismantled several Hezbollah forward posts in the Mount Dove area. Israel defended these moves as part of its broader effort to weaken Hezbollah's strategic presence along the frontier. Yet controversy remains over the legitimacy of Israel's targets. Locals in Ansari insist the bulldozer maintenance complex was purely civilian infrastructure. Images of collapsed machinery sheds and destroyed workshops suggest the attack had little to do with active combat operations. This has fueled accusations of disproportionate military action, increasing fears of additional civilian casualties. UNIFIL further underscored the gravity of the situation by reporting that Israeli drones dropped grenades within close range of peacekeepers. The incident has been described as the most alarming breach of security since the 2024 ceasefire. According to UN officials, prior notification was provided to Israel regarding the road clearance work in Marwahin, yet safety measures were not coordinated adequately. Israel responded by clarifying that it did not directly target UN personnel. Instead, the IDF said it deployed sound bombs in border areas, intended as warnings rather than lethal strikes. Israeli officials confirmed contact had been made with UNIFIL to explain the incident, but skepticism remains high among international observers. The world's attention is now drawn to the border region, where fears persist of an escalation into broader hostilities. International media highlight the precarious balance. Israel frames its actions as defensive, while Lebanon and its allies view the strikes as violations of sovereignty. The gap between these narratives continues to widen, heightening uncertainty about the next phase of the conflict. In Ansari, the humanitarian toll of the airstrike is mounting. Families are leaving their homes in panic, seeking shelter in safer areas. Children and the elderly are the most vulnerable, facing both physical injury and the trauma of sudden displacement. The sight of smoldering ruins and scattered debris has left deep psychological scars across the community. Local aid organizations reported severe difficulties in reaching survivors. Roads damaged by the blast have slowed evacuation efforts, while ongoing fears of follow-up attacks have hampered relief operations. Hospitals in southern Lebanon are overwhelmed, treating patients with burns, shrapnel injuries, and shock. Medical staff warn of shortages in supplies and demand international support to secure safe humanitarian corridors. Eyewitnesses continue to dispute Israel's claims. Residents state that the bulldozer complex was used for civilian construction projects, not as a Hezbollah facility. They argue the airstrike destroyed livelihoods rather than military assets. This contradiction intensifies the controversy, adding to the perception that Israel's actions may have violated international humanitarian law. UNIFIL has expressed growing concern about civilian safety, urging all sides to adhere strictly to deconfliction measures. Peacekeepers emphasize that without proper communication and respect for non-combat zones, risks to both civilians and international personnel remain dangerously high. The mounting human cost has drawn calls for urgent restraint. Global observers stress that each strike deepens instability, pushing the region closer to uncontrolled escalation. For the civilians of Lebanon, the uncertainty and fear remain the harshest consequences of this renewed conflict. The international community has reacted with alarm to Israel's latest actions. France and Qatar have voiced strong condemnation, describing the strike as a breach of international law and a violation of Security Council resolutions. Their statements emphasize that civilian protection must remain paramount and that escalating border tensions threaten the fragile regional balance. UNIFIL issued its own stern warning, labeling the drone incident as the most serious threat to UN personnel since last year's ceasefire. Officials urged both sides to maintain open lines of communication and to uphold the peacekeeping mandate designed to prevent exactly this kind of escalation. The UN stressed that failures in coordination put not only peacekeepers but entire communities at risk. Lebanon has condemned the attack, accusing Israel of reckless aggression. Officials in Beirut insist that targeting a civilian complex demonstrates blatant disregard for Lebanese sovereignty. In contrast, Israel continues to defend its operations, citing Hezbollah as the real danger and framing its strikes as necessary countermeasures. Analysts argue that this clash represents a test for global diplomacy. International mediators now face the challenge of preventing a localized incident from spiraling into broader war. With border villages already bearing the brunt of hostilities, the stakes are rising. Diplomats warn that unchecked escalation could undermine fragile regional security frameworks. The events in Ansari may well become a catalyst for renewed debate within the Security Council, pressing world powers to take clearer stances. For now, global pressure on Israel is building, while calls for restraint echo across capitals from Paris to Doha. Military analysts warn that Israel's choice of target in Ansari may fuel direct retaliation from Hezbollah. The group has historically responded aggressively to perceived attacks on Lebanese territory. The risk of a cross-border escalation, particularly in the sensitive Mount Dove region, is seen as significantly higher following the bulldozer complex strike. The IDF insists its operation was calibrated to weaken Hezbollah's capabilities by dismantling facilities tied to future offensives. Yet images of destroyed civilian workshops raise concerns about proportionality. Observers highlight that such incidents deepen hostility among local populations, making conflict resolution even more difficult. UNIFIL's report on drones dropping grenades near peacekeepers underscores the volatile nature of the situation. A single miscalculation, analysts note, could ignite a much broader confrontation. The proximity of UN personnel to active combat zones has turned them into unwilling witnesses, amplifying global outrage. Regional experts further caution that neighboring states are closely monitoring developments. Lebanon's condemnation was swift, while Arab nations express unease about the prospect of renewed war. Meanwhile, Western allies face pressure to balance Israel's security concerns with international law. The escalating rhetoric suggests that unless diplomatic efforts intensify, border incidents could spiral beyond containment. Observers warn that a cycle of strike and counterstrike would not only endanger civilians but could destabilize the entire Middle East. The Ansari strike, therefore, is viewed not as an isolated event but as a potential flashpoint with far-reaching consequences. For civilians in southern Lebanon, daily life has been turned upside down. Ansari, once a quiet village, now resembles a war zone. Families who remain live in constant fear, while others have fled with little more than the clothes on their backs. Vulnerable groups, especially children and the elderly, face grave risks amid the ongoing uncertainty. Hospitals are strained beyond capacity. Medical workers describe scenes of chaos, with burn victims, shrapnel injuries, and trauma cases crowding emergency rooms. Shortages of medicine and equipment compound the crisis. Relief agencies struggle to coordinate aid deliveries, citing damaged roads and the threat of further airstrikes as major obstacles. Local authorities emphasize that the bulldozer maintenance site destroyed in the attack was civilian in nature, intended for public works rather than military use. Residents see its destruction as proof that Israel's strikes are indiscriminate. These claims have fueled anger across the community and added to mounting international concern. UNIFIL has repeatedly called for stronger safeguards for civilians. Peacekeepers insist that adherence to international humanitarian law is non-negotiable. Without urgent steps to prevent further casualties, the crisis could worsen dramatically. For Lebanon's civilian population, the costs of the conflict are measured not only in damaged infrastructure but in shattered lives. With each new escalation, the fragile hope for safety and normalcy grows more distant. The latest escalation has intensified diplomatic pressure on Israel. France and Qatar have amplified their criticism, urging compliance with international law and calling for immediate de-escalation. Both countries emphasize that protecting civilians should take precedence over military objectives. The United Nations Security Council has convened emergency discussions, with UNIFIL officials briefing delegates on the severity of the incident. Peacekeepers warned that the drone grenade attack represented a grave violation of agreed safety protocols. Calls for accountability have gained traction, pushing Israel into a difficult diplomatic position. Lebanon has renewed its accusations of aggression, appealing for stronger international support. Regional actors, meanwhile, voice concerns that unchecked violence could destabilize the wider Middle East. Observers point out that Hezbollah's response remains a looming variable, with potential to reshape the conflict dynamics entirely. Israel, for its part, insists it is acting defensively against Hezbollah's military buildup. Yet the destruction of what locals describe as a civilian complex has left Israel vulnerable to charges of excessive force. Analysts argue this duality, defensive justification versus humanitarian fallout, is central to the ongoing diplomatic standoff. With pressure mounting, the global community is demanding greater accountability and restraint. The credibility of international law and the authority of the Security Council are both being tested. For now, the border remains tense, and the world waits for signs of whether diplomacy or escalation will prevail. The situation in Lebanon's south remains precarious. The Ansari airstrike has left one civilian dead, several injured, and critical infrastructure reduced to rubble. The IDF frames its actions as defensive, targeting Hezbollah facilities, yet local and international observers highlight the civilian toll as undeniable. The proximity of Israeli drone operations to UN peacekeepers has compounded global outrage. UNIFIL labeled the incident as the most severe since last year's ceasefire, while major powers now confront the challenge of containing potential fallout. France, Qatar, and other nations continue to denounce Israel's actions as breaches of international law. Lebanon demands accountability, while Israel maintains that Hezbollah's military presence leaves it no choice but to strike preemptively. This clash of narratives places immense strain on diplomatic channels already stretched thin. Analysts warn that the trajectory of the conflict could shape Middle Eastern stability in the months ahead. If escalation persists, civilians will bear the heaviest burden, and peacekeeping forces may find themselves increasingly endangered. For now, the border stands as a flashpoint. The destruction in Ansari illustrates the cost of renewed hostilities, while the international community is left to weigh its options. The coming weeks will determine whether diplomacy can prevail or whether the region edges closer to another devastating conflict.